Okay, so we are diving into the world of compost today. And wow, um, the research you sent over is fascinating. I
Wow.
thought I knew a thing or two about gardening, but man, there's a lot more to buying compost than I ever thought.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just about grabbing any old bag, you
Yeah.
know? Understanding what makes compost high quality is going to be key for a healthy garden.
Right, that makes sense. So let's unpack this a bit. One of the things that jumped out at me was this idea of compost as a soil amendment and not a fertilizer. To be honest with you, I've used those terms interchangeably before. What's the difference and why should I care?
Yeah, I think a lot of people get those mixed up. Think of fertilizer like an energy drink for your plants. It gives them that quick boost of readily available nutrients. Compost, on the other hand, is more like a nourishing meal. It's about improving your soil structure and health over the long term.
So compost is more like a long-term investment. Got it.
Exactly. And it's great. Using more compost can actually mean you need less fertilizer over time. Better for your wallet and the environment.
Oh, that's what I like to hear. Okay, so compost good for gardens, check. But then I found this interesting thing about New Hampshire. They passed a law about composting back in 1993. Who knew compost was such a rule follower?
Right. It's not every day you hear about compost legislation. Basically, this law made it illegal for towns in New Hampshire to incinerate or landfill leaves and yard waste. And that actually really boosted composting in the state.
A compost revolution, huh? That sounds pretty dramatic.
Well, it led to a lot more composting facilities and businesses,
Hmm.
farms, garden centers, even dedicated composting companies,
Uh,
all offering different compost products.
okay, so more options for gardeners. But I guess that also means we need to be more careful about what we buy.
Exactly. And that brings us to why we're doing this deep dive today, how to figure out if compost is good quality.
Let's do it. So say I'm at the compost yard. What's the first thing I should do?
Well, use your senses.
Yeah.
Start by looking at it. What color is it? It should be that rich, dark brown, almost black, like dark chocolate for your garden. And the texture should be nice and crumbly, not clumpy or soggy.
No soggy compost,
Yeah.
surprise.
Okay.
Got it. What about the smell, though? Should I be taking a big whiff?
Yeah, actually, your nose is really useful here. Good compost will have a nice earthy smell, like the forest floor after it rains.
Yeah.
But if it's giving off ammonia or that rotten garbage smell, that's a bad sign.
Okay, so we've covered the look and the smell. What's next?
Now we go a little deeper. You want to find out what the compost is made of, like what's the recipe.
Like checking the ingredients list, but for compost?
Yeah, exactly. And there are some ingredients like biosolids that not everyone is comfortable with.
Biosolids. I feel like I've heard that, but remind me what those are again.
Biosolids are basically treated sewage sludge.
Oh, right.
But before you get too grossed out, any biosolids used in compost have to meet very strict safety standards. They're called Class A requirements.
So it's heavily treated,
Yeah, okay.
but I can see why some people would want to avoid it altogether.
Oh, for sure. And that's totally fine. The important thing is having all the information so you can decide what's best for you. Don't be afraid to ask the vendor about the ingredients.
Transparency is key. What about testing, though? Can I ask them about heavy metals or contaminants and stuff like that?
Absolutely. A good vendor will be happy to talk about their testing. They might even have lab reports available. Just keep in mind, compost can vary from batch to batch.
Right, okay. So to recap so far, we've got the look, the smell, and the ingredients lists checked off. It's like we're solving a compost mystery one step at a time.
Exactly. And there's still a few more clues to uncover. Things like the compost analysis. That tells you about the pH, the salt content, and other important factors. We'll get into those next.
Okay, so compost analysis. This is where it gets really sciencey, right? Like I need a lab coat and goggles.
Not quite. You can think of it kind of like a nutrition label for your soil. It tells you what's going on beneath the surface. We'll look at pH levels, salt content, and a few other things that affect how your garden grows.
Right, like secret ingredients.
Yeah.
Okay, so pH. What is that exactly and why should I care about it?
So pH basically tells you how acidic or alkaline something is, and soil can be all over the place. Most plants do best in a neutral environment, so around a pH of 7.
Okay, so neutral is good. Can you tell just by looking at the compost what the pH is?
Not really. It's not something you can see, which is why getting that analysis from the vendor is helpful. They can give you the exact pH and tell you if you need to make any adjustments.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's best to get the info straight from the source.
Yeah.
What about salt? I know too much salt is bad for me, but what about my plants?
Yeah, just like us, plants need a good balance. If there's too much salt in the compost, it can actually stop them from absorbing water properly. It's like they get dehydrated.
Oh, wow. Okay, so how do I know if there's too much salt in the compost? Do I need another lab test for that?
The vendor should have that on their analysis report as well.
Hmm.
Generally, you're aiming for compost with salt levels below 2.5 millimolars per centimeter. You might see it written as EC on the report.
Got it. Lower numbers, good. Okay, so we've covered pH and salt content. Anything else I should look out for on that compost analysis?
One last thing, bulk density. Basically, you want your compost to be light and airy, not like a dense brick. This basically measures how much fluffiness you're getting, so it compares the weight of the compost to how much space it takes up.
So like the difference between a bag of chips and a bag of flour.
Yeah.
Same size bag, but one is way heavier.
Exactly. You want that nice airy compost. And the ideal bulk density is around 1,000 pounds per cubic yard. You might see that on the report too.
Okay, so there's a lot of numbers and technical terms to keep track of on that report. But I have to say, knowing what they all mean makes me feel a lot better about picking out good compost.
It's all about empowering yourself with knowledge. Now, there's one more thing you can do to test your compost, and you can even do this at home. It's called a bioassay test. Remember when we talked about herbicides? This helps you figure out if there are any of those in your compost.
Wait, there's a test I can do at home, like without any special equipment.
Yep. All you need are some pots, some potting soil, and a few bean or pea seeds. It's like a little science experiment.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So you're going to set up 2 groups of pots. In the first group, you plant your seeds in regular potting soil. That's your control group. In the second group, you'll mix 2 parts compost to 1 part potting soil and plant your seeds in that. Make sure you label them so you don't mix them up.
Okay, so we've got our control group living the good life in just the potting soil, and then the test group hanging out in the compost mix. What's next?
Now we watch and wait. Water both sets of pots regularly, give them sunlight, and just let them do their thing. Once they start growing a few leaves, that's when you'll want to compare the 2 groups.
Looking for clues, right?
Yeah.
So if the compost has herbicides in it, how will I know?
You'll want to look closely at the leaves of the plants in the compost mix. If they look weird at all, like curled or twisted or thicker than they should be, that could mean there are herbicides in there. Your control group should be growing normally and can help you compare.
Wow, that is actually so cool.
Yeah.
And surprisingly simple. Who knew bean sprouts could be so helpful?
It just goes to show you don't need a fancy lab to learn about your compost, just some good observation skills.
Speaking of observation, let's talk about those desirable attributes we mentioned earlier. You know, the things that make compost look and feel amazing. I feel like we're judging a compost beauty pageant.
Uh-huh. I like that. And you're right, we can actually tell a lot about compost just by looking at it. We already covered color and texture, but there's also temperature and consistency to think about.
Right. Okay, so we know compost should be that nice dark brown or black and have a good crumbly texture. What about the temperature, though? Shouldn't good compost be kind of hot? It's decomposing and everything?
So you're right, the composting process creates heat, but by the time you buy it, it should be completely cooled down. If it's still hot to the touch, that might mean it's not done composting yet, and it could be bad for your plants.
Okay, so not too hot. Got it. What about the consistency then?
The best compost is going to be light and fluffy, kind of like a big pile of leaves. It should crumble easily in your hand.
So airy and crumbly is better than dense and soggy.
Exactly. And that perfect texture means it's good quality, and it's also going to help with drainage and aeration in your garden, which your plants will love you for.
Wow, I had no idea. There was so much to learn just from looking at compost.
There's a lot we can learn from those visual cues. They tell us a lot about how the compost was made and what the quality is like.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the ingredients, the pH, the salt content, and even how to judge it just by looking at it. I feel like a compost pro.
You're well on your way. And the best part is that you can use this knowledge to pick out high-quality compost that's good for your garden and the environment.
Okay, so as we wrap up our compost deep dive, what are the big takeaways here? What should people remember when they're out there buying compost?
I think the biggest thing is to really think about what you're buying. Don't just grab the first bag of compost you see. Take some time to check it out.
Like you said, it's an investment in our gardens.
Exactly. So use your senses. What does it look like? Is it that nice dark color? Does it have that good texture? And how does it smell? It should smell earthy and pleasant.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, definitely. A good vendor will be happy to talk to you about their process, their ingredients, their testing, all that stuff.
I gotta say, I've learned so much about compost from doing this deep dive. I had no idea there was so much to it.
And now you're ready to choose compost like a pro. You'll be able to spot that good quality stuff that your garden will love.
It's definitely been eye-opening. I feel like I need to rethink my whole compost game now.
Well, that's a good thing, right? It's all about being thoughtful and making choices that are good for our gardens and the environment.
So to leave our listeners with one last thought, now that you know how to judge compost, Maybe you could even try making your own at home. That could be a fun project. Turn your kitchen scraps into garden gold.
Now that's an idea I can get behind.
And on that note, that's it for today's deep dive. We hope you enjoyed learning all about the wonderful world of compost. See you next time, and happy gardening.